Hey, Todd Hampson here. Welcome to another video. This is the final video in our Understanding Israel Biblically series. And in the previous three videos, we talked about the what, the when, the why. Now we're going to talk about the how. If you haven't watched those videos, please go back and watch those because they really do set the foundation and really kind of have a slow walk through the logic and some key verses that we have to wrestle with to fully understand this concept of Israel and the question of, is God done with Israel? So today, this is kind of the final one. It's going to wrap everything up, and we're going to talk about what is the order of events? How does all this take place? Again, in the previous videos, we've already established that God's not done. Paul even said in Romans 11, when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, one day all Israel will be saved. That was yet future from 56 to 58 AD time frame. We unpacked all that. So today we're assuming you agree with all that and you've wrestled with all that. Today we're going to put the puzzle pieces together to see biblically how this takes place in the future. So I'm going to do less scriptural support, other than I'm going to mention several passages I want you to look at if you haven't studied this before. And really, I'm just going to put the pieces together and mention the logic behind it, and also where you can go check those verses out. So again, first check out Romans 9 through 11, really. But Romans 11 is where it all crescendos. God makes it super clear that even in Paul's time frame, that God's gift and calling to the Jewish people are irrevocable, that the Jewish people have not stumbled beyond repair, that God was not done with them, that one day all Israel would be saved. So it's crystal clear, Romans 11. You can't get away from it. You can dig into the Greek. You can read it in any translation. It says the same thing. It's really, really crystal clear that God is not done with the Jewish people, and there's coming a future time when all Israel, all remaining Jews who are alive, will turn to the Messiah. So today we're looking at how does that happen? Well, I believe that the rapture of the church takes place to finish the church age. When the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, as Paul mentions in Romans 11, when that last Gentile of the church age is saved, I believe that's when the rapture occurs. And then at that moment, then God shifts his attention back to the Jewish people. You see that in the book of Revelation. It is heavily Jewish. There's two Jewish witnesses who prophesy from Jerusalem. There are 144,000 sealed Jewish witnesses, 12,000 from each tribe that apparently go around and evangelize the world, tell everyone about Christ. Because in the next passage in Revelation 7, you see that there's a giant multitude of believers who have come to Christ after the rapture, once the tribulation period has begun. Also, just to mention, I mentioned in the last video all the hundreds of verses that talk about this future kingdom age. There's also scores of verses leading up to those and partnering with those that talk about first a time of great tribulation on the earth when all the nations will be gathered against Israel. We're going to read one of those here today as one of the passages I do want to highlight. But I'm kind of setting some framework here first. Daniel 9:27 talks about a future Antichrist who will confirm a covenant with Israel and who will break it in the middle. And in that passage, it talks about the destruction of one temple, and then the stopping of sacrifices in the future and at the midpoint of the future tribulation period. So there's something that has to occur between the destruction of one temple and the setting up of a new temple. I believe that's where the church age fits in. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I'm doing it for a purpose. Daniel 9:27, as well as Matthew 24, highlight the fact that in the last days, Israel will be in the land again, in control of the land, in control of Jerusalem, and they're in unbelief. They have to be in unbelief to confirm a covenant with a pagan, secular Antichrist. They see him as a political hero, so they won't have turned to Christ by that point yet. So, and I mention that because a lot of people say, well, modern day Israel that was established in 1948 is mostly secular. They're not believers. Well, there's some some Jewish people who are believers, obviously. But by and large, that's true. Most of the Jewish state are made up of secular people, even atheists. But what people fail to realize, because they don't do their homework, this lines up with Scripture. Again, Daniel 9:27, Matthew 24, and also Ezekiel 36 and 37. There are several indicators in there that the regathering of the Jewish nation, when God brings them up out of the graves and puts their bones together and brings their cities and their land back to life, there's a lot of indication there that that's going to be in unbelief. Even in Ezekiel 38, after the war of Gog and Magog, which I believe takes place right around the time of the confirming of the covenant, so after the rapture, when that takes place, there's even language saying that from that time forward, they will know that Jehovah, that their God is Jehovah. So they haven't yet turned to Christ, but they're going to shift apparently from a secular mindset, returning to their Jewish roots and looking at God once again. So they're not yet Christians, but they're going to return to a belief in Yahweh, in the Old Testament God. Then we get to, and here's where it's exciting, Zechariah 12. Now, before I read Zechariah 12, I want to remind you that there are a couple places where Jesus said, right after being hailed as king on the triumphal entry, then rejected by the Jewish leadership, then he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. He wept over the city, and he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to protect you under my wings, but now there's a blindness in part. Now it will be hidden from your eyes until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So until, not there's a blindness in part, and you're going to be this is going to be hidden from your eyes forever, but until. So he's pointing to a future time when they will say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, we compare Scripture with Scripture. We go to Zechariah 12, and I just want to read a few passages. The context of Zechariah 12 is the future tribulation period. I'll start at verse 2. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Judah will be besieged as well as Jerusalem on that day, which is a key word often used for the day of the Lord, the tribulation period. And here's another indicator. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her. In Revelation 19, that's what we read. All the nations are gathered in Armageddon to attack Jerusalem and fight against God. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. So that's the context. We're in the tribulation period. Matter of fact, that particular passage lines up, as I mentioned, with Revelation 19 and sections in Matthew 24 that put that toward the end of the tribulation period. So here's what I believe happens at the end. You drop down a few verses. Verse 10. This is at the end of the tribulation, when all the nations are gathered, about to fight God. They're going after the Jews. And this is what we read in verse 10. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. Think about this. This is written Old Testament, before the cross, before we knew anything about crucifixion. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, only begotten son, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be as great as the weeping of Hadad and Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. So this is the moment when the scales fall off, when that partial hardening goes away that Paul talked about, when they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, which means they're calling on the name of the Lord again, like they did on when they ushered him in with the triumphal entry. Only this time, instead of looking for a political Messiah, they will see him as the true Messiah. They will finally realize, after 7 years of God putting his focus back on the Jewish people, sending 2 Jewish witnesses, 144 Jewish witnesses, and focusing all this attention to win the Jewish people back. And by the way, the biggest multitude of Gentiles also get saved. The biggest revival in history will occur in the early throes of the tribulation period. So even in the midst of God's wrath is also God's grace. And even in the midst of God returning his attention back to the Jewish people, grace is still available to everyone else as well. But God's attention and main purpose for the future 7-year tribulation period, based on Daniel 9:27, is to return his focus back to the Jewish people, to bring them to this point when they look upon the one whom they pierced, when they call on the Messiah, and that's what ushers in the Lord's return. So I know I just threw a lot at you with more to study if you want to back up what I just told you in this video than the previous three. The previous three, I think they stand on their own and the logic is built there. But this is the culmination. It all leads to this. I believe that's how it all fits together. Check it out for yourself. Read those passages that I just read. See how they link up. See how they tie together. But we have to wrestle with these passages. They're not allegory. We can't allegorize them. We have to look at them contextually about what time period they're talking about and what order things take place. So we can see that. I believe if you roll up your sleeves, do a little bit of study, and put all these passages together, built on the foundation of the previous three videos that I just shared. So I know that's a lot, but I hope that brings some clarity. I hope overall this whole series helps believers understand Israel biblically, that they are in the land again as a fulfillment of prophecy. Every Old Testament prophet, except for Jonah, predicted in some way, shape, or form that there would be a regathering of the Jewish people in the last days. Many of those passages hint at or overtly show that they will be there in unbelief, if you look at it carefully, before they come to the Lord. So it all lines up. It is a fulfillment of prophecy. It doesn't mean the Jewish people are perfect or the Jewish government is perfect. They have a right to the land, though, a biblical right to the land. God restored them as a fulfillment of prophecy. They have a right to defend themselves, and we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We need to honor God in that respect. So hopefully this brings some clarity. Please share this with people as you hear believers wrestling with whether or not the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of prophecy, or the Jews or the Israel that is spoken about in the Old Testament. I've done my best here in these 4 videos to kind of prove that that it is thoroughly biblical, that we are to support them, we are to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we are to encourage our Jewish friends, especially in light of the global anti-Semitism that has arisen since October 7th, 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago. So now more than ever, we need to understand Israel biblically, and we need to act accordingly. So take care. God bless. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time on a different topic, since we're wrapping up this four-part series on understanding Israel biblically. Take care.